This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Family owned for 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. Hey, do you like free stuff? As a member of the operating crew, you'll get a chance to win awesome prizes each month. For less than a dime a day, you'll be entered to win, and just as important, your support helps keep every episode from behind a paywall and free of those unrelated and annoying commercials you hear on other podcasts. Sign up today at aroundthelayout.com/crew, and thank you for your support. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On this episode, we're talking ops with our guest, Chris Adams. Chris is going to tell us how layout operations can become an historical reenactment. And joining me for that conversation is my co-host, Don Irace. Don, great to see you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another month of ops.
Yes, another month of ops. Summertime, and things may have slowed down a little bit on the P&W, huh?
Yeah, things have slowed way down. All the snowbirds flew up north. So we got a limited crew. But we did a little, well, after when you hit a session last night, we did a little ops session with just three of us. And, we just get together, three or four of us. There's a couple more people we're trying to dig up that we can get in for the summer. I don't want to get too many people in because when the guys come back in the winter, then somebody has to stay home.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a balancing act, isn't it, to try to keep those crews balanced off, isn't it?
Yeah. So I mean, we won't operate every week. We maybe do a couple of times a week. Hopefully, John will be available, and we'll get to his house, and whatever, just do what we can do. If not, I'll start modeling and getting stuff done that I want to get done that I normally can't do between op sessions. So I got a few projects on horizon, waiting for some stuff to come in, but we'll get it done.
Well, that's good. But at least we get to talk ops tonight, and excited to bring on a guest, fellow nutmegger, Chris Adams. Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you guys. Thank you for having me on the show.
Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks.
Just saw you this past weekend as we record at the New England RPM, and I know my flywheel's turning. How about yours, Chris?
Yeah, the timing of the NERPM this year could not have been better. My busy time of year ended at the beginning of the month, and the month wrapped up with NERPM. I was able to have a little bit of time between end of my busy session at work and the weekend, the NERPM weekend, to get things ready for the layout open house I was doing. And yeah, to be able to just immerse myself in model railroad stuff for a whole weekend was just the palate cleanser I needed after a crazy time at work.
There's nothing like an event coming up to get your wheels spinning.
Yeah, absolutely. Deadlines are motivational.
Motivation. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I know I left there all pumped up, ready to run through a wall for model railroading. And then we talked, we got to sit down and chat about this upcoming episode. I was really excited and to learn more. It's been a long while since you've been on the show. I go back to episode 7, July 5th, 2023.
Wow.
Now, typically I'll tell folks, go back and listen to, but episode 7 is kind of like showing the very first car you ever weathered. Like it's not, it's like you wonder, hey, go back and look at it. Just remember it was episode 7. And I hope I've gotten just slightly better in episode 238. So, but Chris was great on that show. He told us about the Valley Local. But for those who haven't caught episode 7 and gone back and listened, Chris, why don't you just kind of give us just a little bit on the Valley Local as a layout? Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it is primarily a branch line. So the New Haven Railroad, I modeled the New Haven Railroad in autumn of 1948. Yeah, sometimes it goes at 47, sometimes it goes at 49 when I get really crazy. But it's pretty much just autumn of 48. That's the steam and diesel transition. So that's the era. It's HO scale, takes up most of the basement. And I know we'll get into a little bit of the what makes it unique later, but yeah, it's the Connecticut Valley line. It goes from Old Saybrook, Connecticut to Hartford, Connecticut, in the center of the state, right along the west shore of the Connecticut River, and was really just a typical New England branch line. Local commodities, retail railroading, where the stuff of life just gets shipped in and not too much gets shipped out. I mean, that was the New Haven, but at the end of the day, it's a nice laid back railroad, and there's a little slice of the real New Haven that I include down in Old Saybrook, which we'll get into, and so it provides a little bit of contrast. But it's about 600 to 700 square feet total line, and is made up of the Valley branch, like I said, between Old Saybrook and Hartford, including a couple of other little branch lines that I'm able to model a little portion of in order to get some trains moving around. And yeah, it shows what railroading was like in this area in southern New England in the early post-war era. That's the whole goal.
Oh, so what was the attraction to the New Haven to get you started with New Haven?
Well, it's that could be either a short story or a long story. I'll try and give you the medium story. But I'd gotten into railroad stuff Christmas of 1982. My great-grandmother was visiting us, and my younger brother got a train set, and I got a Timex Sinclair 1000 computer that Christmas. By the end of the day, I was playing more with the train set than the computer, because my great-grandmother was telling me all sorts of stories about her husband and her father, who both worked for the Illinois Central. And I was already into history, and then to have that family history and then have the train kind of as the catalyst for bringing all that together was really, really compelling. Then I saw my first issue of Model Railroader a few weeks later when my dad and I went to buy more track for my brothers, so-called brothers, train set. And so I knew I wanted to get really into model railroading. And then, as it turned out, there was a 3-volume set of books in my high school library, because I came to model railroading really late. I was already going into high school. And it was a 3-volume set called The Memories of the New Haven Railroad. And one of the first books on the New Haven Railroad that was published. At that point, it was only 10 years since it had been merged into Penn Central. And I discovered very quickly, hey, this is the railroad that used to run, in this state, where we are. And I was always into kind of industrial archaeology and going and finding old battlefields. I was really into Civil War history earlier. But now I have all these photos to go, as soon as I got my driver's license, go visit North Canaan and the Canaan Union Station up there, all these other places that were disappearing at that point, and taking pictures. I got into photography. But it was really because it was the railroad that was local to me here and had a compelling story going from New York City to Boston, but then all sorts of little branch lines too. So for such a small railroad, it had a really wide variety of equipment and operations as well.
What part of the New Haven operations did you actually find fascinating?
The main thing for the New Haven, and most people will tell you, it's really the name trains, the Yankee Clipper, or you would say the Clipper. You got the Merchants, you got the Merchants Limited. You've got a great, well, actually, it's literally a great railroad at work, a movie that you can get out on YouTube that shows what the railroad was like during World War II, and just the variety of equipment between the diesel and the steam and the electric. So a lot of folks are really compelled by the main line along the shore going from Boston to New York, but that's really, really hard to model and to do it effectively. the density of traffic through Old Saybrook alone in 1948, you'd get 71 trains during the course of a 24-hour period. Everything from local freights to mainline freights going from Boston down to New York or out to Maybrook, big Maybrook yard out in New York, named passenger trains, limiteds, camp specials, all sorts of traffic on that main line. And but that's just really, really tough to model. So I always have gravitated toward locals and local freights, way freights, and to just any system map of the New Haven that you look at, it's not so much a railroad line as it is a railroad web. I mean, you look at the system map and it's like, where's the trunk line? Where's the main line? Because it developed very early in the nation's history. So, before, roads and highways and stuff like that. So it was really a way of connecting every little town in southern New England. So it's just this network of tracks, which made it very susceptible to truck competition after the war. But up until then, boy, you'd have little local freights running everywhere on the system all over southern New England. So that's what really got me focused, was to really focus in on a branch line.
At the top of the show, I had mentioned I saw you at the New England RPM, and of course you were there for all the models and all the events, but you were also there to represent the New Haven Railroad Technical and Historical Association. Talk about joining that and tying all that history, because obviously you said early on you were very passionate about history. It rolls into the New Haven Railroad Technical and Historical Association. How did you connect with that, and how did that help in all of this?
Well, I discovered the NHRA, NHRHTA, New Haven Railroad Historical and Technical Association, in 1985. So I'd only been into model railroading for just a couple of years. January of 1983 was my first issue of Model Railroader. And then, it was all about just diving into, I'm really about context. So whenever I get into, move to a new area or, discover a new place, I got to know everything there is to know about that place, the history, the background, what did they do here? Why is this place here? And so, that just, was something that really compelled me to join the Historical Society, because that's where I could get that information. But before I actually joined, what really got me was they had, back then it was called a reunion, we call it a convention now, but they had an annual reunion. And it was a full weekend of events, back in the mid-late 80s. You'd have Friday Night Bijou, where they would show slideshows and movies of the New Haven, then train show during the day on Saturday with the old company photographer, Charlie Gunn, was still around back in the mid-80s. And so he was there with binders and binders of photographs that he took when he was the company photographer back in the 1950s. All sorts of memorabilia and artifacts, just immersing yourself right in the New Haven Railroad. And then on Sunday, there'd usually, there'd be a banquet that night with a keynote speaker. And at that time, again, less than 15 years after the railroad went defunct, we had former railroad presidents, former railroad officials that would be speakers. And then the next day on Sunday, there'd usually be some sort of shop tour down at New Haven Railroad Shops or Cedar Hill. So it was really just a way to immerse yourself in the history of the railroad. And so I was all through the late 80s and 90s, I was, a member in getting the shoreliner and stuff. But then, after school calmed down, I started settling into life in the late 90s, early 2000s. I got more involved, got on the board, became membership chairman, the photo archive had preceded me, but I got a group of guys around me. God, it's literally a quarter century now, 25 years ago, working on the photo library. I got it from, inherited it in a sense from Pete McLaughlin, who New Haven Railroad folks know that name. And it's just ballooned from there. We've cataloged over 18,000 images.
Wow.
Since then. We still have the Thursday night group. They still get together. There's some guys that have been here for the 25 years, from my house in Milford to now in Old Saybrook. And now we're, entering the 21st century by starting to digitize some of this stuff and get it onto our online archive. And so that has been the result of my stepping it up a notch even further, not just being photo librarian, but agreeing to take over as president after Bill Domain decided to step down and finally retire. I mean, he was the mover and shaker and the president back when I first went to my first reunion back in the mid 80s. Wow. And so, it was, he wanted to take a little bit of a break and I agreed to help out. And so we've got a new generation of folks learning from the older generation. There's a lot of baton passing, a lot of mentoring that we're seeing happen. And it's just really exciting time to be part of the Historical Association. And I can tell you that, and, anybody that's been around a NERPM or, an RPM or prototype modeling, becoming a member of the Railroad Historical Association, that is the association for your railroad, is just a no-brainer. You're going to get the information that you need. You're going to be able to talk to the people you need to talk to, meet the people you need to meet, and really get your modeling up to the next level. And even if you're not modeling, I mean, good grief, just learning about how these railroads interacted with one another and really built the country. I mean, it sounds cliche, but it's absolutely true. And it's a fascinating history. No matter what railroad you're talking about, they all have their own unique stories. So you should really join the Historical Society for your railroad if you've got one.
So based on that, how much does your operation directly based on a prototype?
As much as possible. That's something that continues to evolve. Unfortunately, I got into prototype operations fairly late. I mean, I got John Armstrong's book early on, Model Railroad Operations. I've got Tony Custer's book. I've got the big Model Railroad Operations compendium that the OPSIG put out. I joined the OPSIG. But I got to tell you, and this is no slight to any of those publications, which are amazing and super, super helpful, but they're not so helpful for the New Haven in a lot of ways, because so many of those ops books talk about what is, without any insult at all, but your typical railroad. You've got division point yards, and you've got, maybe staging on each end, and maybe a terminal yard, and it's a trunk line, and you've got your way freights. I mean, this is stuff that is really well trodden ground for ops and how to work that out. But how do you take what the New Haven did, which was basically a huge terminal railroad? I mean, that was kind of a nickname that it had in Southern New England. Just bringing in loads. My buddy Randy Hamill would know the answer to this off the top of his head. What the percentage of was loads to empties, loads coming into shipments going out. And it was some insanely lopsided number with loads coming in and empties going out. And in the middle of all that, you've got all of these local freights trying to get these cars from from the gateways, either Maybrook, their big yard in upstate New York, or Oak Point, the car floats down in Manhattan, getting all that traffic and cars to the rest of Southern New England. I mean, it was intense car handling. And the ops books don't really get into that as much. And so I've really had to try and cobble together the ops scheme based on what I can glean from, the historical information I'm able to find as part of the NERSHA, talking to people. Unfortunately, there are fewer and fewer folks that actually remember what actually happened on the New Haven back then. There isn't a lot of firsthand account that's still around. But when you get those things, that's, you take a lot of notes and you try and capture as much of that as possible. And that's what I've tried to do.
It seems to me like this could be all things that can be done well before a layout is even built, or a track is laid, or a car or a locomotive is bought. And there's so much to it. It really becomes a hobby in itself, just doing all that research, learning about your railroad, learning about the prototype that you have. And it's just going to seemingly make that process easier. Is that what you found?
Oh, absolutely. And it's I've often find myself teetering at the edge of the rabbit holes. I mean, looking down into the abyss and just like, okay, I really got to back out of this, or else I'm not going to get anything else accomplished. I mean, and I find it so fascinating anyway, because it scratches a lot of itches. I mean, it checks a lot of boxes. You've got the historical research, you've got photographs. I mean, you can start discerning things. You can start discerning ops from photographs. The makeup of trains. What direction they're heading at what time. Compare those to the employee timetables and the freight car and package schedule books. You start cross-referencing all this stuff, and it's like a giant puzzle. You keep putting all these little bits of information together, and a picture starts to emerge. It's like a mosaic. You get all these little pieces that themselves, it isn't much, and it's just like, oh, geez, I wish I had more information. Well, then all of a sudden you'll get another bit of information, and then another bit, and you start putting these things together, and you start getting a picture of what things looked like back then. And that for me is so much what the hobby is for me, which is recreating that history. I mean, one of the things that always frustrated me about some folks, not a lot, but some, well, who's going to want to model the New Haven Railroad because, it died in 1968. Nobody remembers it anymore and everything. It's like, good grief, my buddy Bill Schneider up the road, he models the O&W, and they were gone 10 years before the New Haven. And there's a lot of O&W modelers.
Yeah.
Bernie Kempinski models the Civil War era, for crying out loud. I mean, if you're into history, you'll figure out a way to model it. And that's really, for me, what is the time machine aspect of the hobby, is really recreating as much of this as I can, and then being able to tell that story, because then you end up becoming a history professor. And then folks that aren't even really into railroads so much, but they're into history, they come and look at the railroad, and you can kind of tell them the story of, okay, well, this is how goods used to get around, not by drone, not by FedEx truck, not by drop and run from the white van, God forbid. But this is, you go down to your freight house and you get your crated up Schwinn bicycle. This is how things used to happen, and that story will be forgotten if we don't have historians and modelers, frankly, to preserve that story and then tell it to others.
Before we get into how you took all of this information and applied it to your railroad, I got to ask, at any point learning about the New Haven, did you ever waver away from the Valley Local? Did you ever look at any other line and say, boy, I'd really love to, did it ever get confusing for you based on all this information, all this historical information you were getting out of your research?
Yeah, a couple things. I'm sorry, a little frog in my throat. I get all choked up when I talk about this stuff.
It's okay.
But the short answer is absolutely. It's unfortunate for so many reasons that we only have one lifetime, because there are so many compelling subjects out there. I mean, before I got into the New Haven, I was really into the Rutland, only because the summer of 1983, so this would be 6 months after I got into trains themselves, we were up in Vermont, and my parents would always go to antique stores. And now, I would be going to antique stores with them as well. But now I'm asking, the guy at the antique store, do you have any railroad stuff? And we go up to Vermont for vacation that summer. And this guy's like, oh, yeah, I've got a whole box of stuff. And it was a whole box of Rutland waybills and newsliner magazines and paperwork and everything. It's a huge box. It's like, oh, $10. So I took my allowance, bought the box of stuff, and I was all in on the Rutland. I got a copy of Shawnee Seat's book, The Rutland Road, read that thing cover to cover, wore out 2 copies, going through that. I was going to get, the PS1s with the green and yellow and the wooden cabooses that were painted, Cavalry in 1953, the whole new image. Yeah, I was all into that. And then I discovered in high school, I discovered the New Haven. And then it was like, oh, I've been, right after I got my driver's license, I'd always heard about Canaan Union Station. So one of the first trips I did without my parents knowing about it is I drove my 74 Datsun Bondomobile pickup truck up to North Canaan to take pictures up there. And so I was going to model the Berkshire line. And so I was all in on the Berkshire line. And that's what I had. I had gotten as far as bench work at the house in Milford. And then whenever I moved to Saybrook, the Valley line is here. But also in the intervening time, and this is an important fact, which really tells me that I'm doomed, for better or for worse, to always model the Valley line, is I started working for the Valley line. I started working on the Valley Railroad out of Essex, the Essex Steam Train and Riverboat, right out of high school, and was a steam locomotive fireman for 3 years, and met a guy named Max Miller who could date a photograph by the number of insulators on the crossbars of a telegraph pole. He could tell so much from a photograph, and I learned a lot from him. And then there was another guy, John Wallace, who we might get into a little bit later, who took photos of the Valley line when he was in high school back in the late 40s, the exact era that I was interested in. And so between Max being an expert on the Valley and then John having firsthand experience with the line I wanted to model, it was just like, holy cow. I mean, talk about being blessed with resource. And so off to the races. And so I've got a lot, I can't not model this line, but every once in a while, the siren call, the BNM will call to me, or maybe the Narragansett Pier, something totally different, because you can know too much about your prototype. And sometimes with an OCD kind of guy like me, you can't unsee things. And sometimes it's fun to not know, so you can kind of be a little more relaxed and just do whatever. But boy, once I know, I've got to model it. I've got to do it the way it's supposed to be.
So tell us about the compromises. We all have compromises we're going to make. What's your compromises on New Haven?
Biggest compromise, I think, is only being able to model one town on the shoreline. That's Old Saybrook. And I wasn't even going to attempt it at first, but, after I got out of bike racing, believe it or not, I was only going to have two 2x8 modules was going to be my entire model railroad. But because I did take a little bit of a hiatus from the hobby back from 2006 to 2011, 2013. I mean, the National came to Hartford in 2009. It was right across the park from where I worked, and I didn't go because I was all into bike racing at the time.
Yeah.
But so I wasn't even going to model, anything except for those two 2x8s. But then, when I got out of bike racing, that freed up the rest of the basement. I decided to go down to Old Saybrook to anchor the south end of the line. And then I was like, oh man, it would be really nice to be able to model more of the shoreline. And that's probably the biggest compromise is the shoreline is a dog bone. It's one scene. It's Old Saybrook. And because it was really shoehorned in, I don't have much in the way of staging. Literally, the whole West End staging is built on an 8-inch shelf that I can't deliver it off the front of one of those 2x8 modules, hit it in a box. It's got 4 tracks, each 8 or 10 feet long. And that's, how I'm able to simulate the shoreline traffic is I've got 4 staging tracks at each end of the dog bone. And my shoreline operators just fire trains at one another back and forth. We get through 32 trains in the course of an op session. And it's intense traffic. I mean, and one of the cool things, again, going on the prototype is because I'm only modeling one town. I mean, talk about making lemonade out of lemons. Since I'm only doing one town, I just fired trains through that Saybrook scene. And because of the way the New Haven did alternating eastbounds and westbounds, just reusing a little bit of equipment and the fact that in that era it was all DL109s, so back-to-back diesels, reusing equipment on tight headways, I can replicate the actual prototype timetable to the minute, each and every train from 7:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. on a 4-to-1 fast glide. And so those shoreline guys that is their job, and that's what they get immersed in, is just getting those trains through on time. Some of them stop in Saybrook, the ones that are supposed to stop. The limiteds that don't stop, don't. And they just fire trains back and forth. But, then the branch line itself is a whole different world. But that's the main compromise. It'd be nice to have some more of the New Haven shoreline, but, one town's enough, I think.
You talked about how you based the trains in Old Saybrook on the timetable and how accurately you were able to do that. Talk about the rest of the layout in the accuracy to the prototype. How much of the prototype are you able to emulate even in compression?
Oh, that kind of a cool story, and I'll give you 2 layers of it. First of all is kind of the more clinical paperwork-based level, which is that you go through, and every railroad probably has one, but they'll have employee timetables and symbol books. So a symbol book for the New Haven is basically a employee timetable for the freight trains. And in those symbol books, you'll also see, the local freight trains as well and what schedule they have, or I should say what schedule they're supposed to have. So, local freight train often, will go off schedule, they're all extras. So I know that I've got 4 locals on my layout. So I've got an eastbound and westbound local on the shoreline, and I've got the Valley local, and I've got the airline local. The airline was another branch that came in and intersected the Valley line at Middletown. So you've got the Valley local, Quad Valley local, the train that was actually called the Valley local just came down from Hartford down through Middletown, and then on alternate days it would go to either up the branch to East Berlin or down further on the line down to East Haddam, Connecticut. And then the south end, what would be basically the South End Valley local, in my era would be the westbound shoreline local that on its way from Fort Yard in New London to Cedar Hill Yard in New Haven would actually go up the branch at Old Saybrook and go up as far as East Haddam to swap cars and interchange with the Valley local that came in from the north. So I was able to cobble all that information together based on the paperwork, based on the information that I gleaned from the symbol books. And another reason to join a Railroad Historical Society is that you can access that stuff. And before I joined, I was an early adopter of eBay, so I would find these things on eBay. I'd photocopy them, and then I'd resell the originals because I didn't need to have the originals, and frankly, I didn't want to, tear them apart because I knew I was going to really be using them. So I got photocopies of all this stuff that I use. So that's the paperwork side, and I would say that's the more clinical side, and what most people are limited to. And they're lucky if they get that, if they can get that kind of information to replicate the prototype ops. But the other thing is firsthand knowledge, and that's where John Wallace comes in. So John Wallace wrote a feature article in the New Haven Railroad Historical Association's Shoreliner magazine that I remember reading way back in the early 90s. And he, his memories of the Valley Line. And so this was an article that he wrote, a whole feature about his experiences, photographing the Valley local when he was in high school. He grew up in his grandparents' house in Fernwood Street in Wethersfield, 3 houses away from the main line. He'd often jump on the train, fire the train down to Middletown, take pictures along the way. And, the guy, even in his 80s, brain like a steel trap. We just lost him in February, and, pretty devastating, but lived a good long life. He was in his 90s, but still sharp as a tack. And in that article, there was a section that was called A Day on the Valley Local. And in that article, he went through a typical day on the train, every car move, every, the interchange with the airline local in Middletown, the fact that they went to O'Rourke's Diner, which is still there today, on the 2 crews while they were filling their tanks with water. Sometime, what the war traffic was like during the war with the blockade and all the tanks of oil, the oil trains coming up the Valley Line. I mean, he went through a typical day, move for move, what industries got switched, all this stuff. And the main compelling focus of the layout early on and from the start, and was all I was going to do, was I want to recreate that. I want to recreate that in HO scale. And, one of the, you have a highlight reel in your life. I mean, I don't have kids, so obviously, if I did, one of the highlight reels would be having kids. Well, one of my highlight reels is going to play the time I was able to have John Wallace come to my layout, operate the Valley local, and replicate move for move every move that he wrote about in that article. Because I've got every siding, every industry, every car that he described in the article. And he was able to go through and recreate that typical day. And, it's like, okay, drop mic, I'm done. There's nothing else I can do now.
Yes, seal of approval, right? I mean,
exactly.
how do you beat that?
What's better than that?
Be careful, though, because early on, before we got to that highlight, the low light was he came down, down in the basement, because he was part of our Thursday night photo library crew for a while. And for every Thursday he would come and he's like, oh, what's going on with the layout? Let me go down and check out the layout. So on this one particular Thursday, I was really excited, and because he was going to see Wethersfield, the town he grew up in. The bench work was in, the track is in, and everything. And I've got Wethersfield lumber, Ballantyne's, I've got Valley Coal, the 3 industries that I know that he switched back in the day. And so I'm excited. He comes down and everything, and he looks at all that. Yeah, I can see in my mind's eye, it's just track and plywood, but I can see how this is all going to lay out. I know you had to compress it. This is like 5 miles and like 10 feet, but that's a compromise, Don. So that's another compromise. Everything's compressed, right?
Yeah.
But then he kind of pauses and he's like, I hope you don't mind me saying so, but what's that long passing track you got in front of the station? I'm like, oh, that's the passing track. You got the main, you got the passing track, and then you got the bulk track. He's like, well, what year you're modeling 1940, late 40s, right? 1948, right? And it's like, yeah, and this is the track plan. That's what the Sanborn map shows. He's like, well, what's the date on the Sanborn map? It's like, well, it's 1927. He's like, well, the passing track was taken out in 34, right? I was like, no. He's like, yeah, because passenger service ended on this end of the line in 1933, and the railroad was scrapping, just scrapping out passenger sightings where they didn't need them. Like, seriously?
Did you have it already ballasted?
It wasn't ballasted, but it was glued down. And suffice it to say, by the next Thursday, the passing track was gone.
There you go.
But here's the cool thing, is that now all of a sudden the pictures that I had seen of Wethersfield, I'd always wondered, why does the passing track in Wethersfield look so far away from the main? There's all this real estate between the passing track and the main. It's not supposed to look like that. Well, it's because that's where the passing track used to be.
Oh.
I mean, you got the bulk track, way offset from the main. But even on my layout today, if you look closely, you can see little bumps in the scenery where the Alien Tacky glue remnants are from where I took the ties out.
That's funny.
But in reality, that must actually, you think that, oops, and kind of egg on your face for having something that doesn't belong there. But in reality, it's got to feel good that now it's closer to prototype, and now you've got the right information.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's always a process, isn't it? Are you learning new things as you go?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest losses with him being gone now is I've already started to miss the collaboration. I mean, we had pretty much, exhausted the vein of information between the two of us over the last, it's 15 years now since we, I say we because he was really my collaborator on the project. But the thing I'm going to miss is our collaboration. The thing I'm going to miss is the emails back and forth, especially early on. I mean, I would be asking him questions, and he would be just like, "I haven't thought of that in over 70 years." But that just, I mean, I will have asked him a question, and it would have, the brain is an amazing thing, and especially his brain. Something would click, and all of a sudden, this whole vista of information would open up to him, and just based on something that I asked, he's now accessing all these other memories surrounding the question that I asked, which then gives me more information and gives me more flavor and makes the layout even richer. So yeah, I mean, if he's looking down on us now, I tease him every once in a while and say, look at nobody, if I'm making a little compromise over here, or if I'm doing a little bit of a relaxation of the prototype over there, just like, John, nobody else is going to know. Only you would have known this.
So now we've talked about a guy that knows the railroad, right? What happens? Like, I'm coming to your house. I've never been there before. How are you going to get me involved with the New Haven Railroad before we start?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the main thing that I can offer to somebody that doesn't know anything about the New Haven Railroad isn't really to start with the New Haven Railroad, but it's to start with the time period and get you into the mood, if I can use a Glenn Miller reference, in the mood of what it was like to be in Southern New England, early post-war period, retail railroading. You're going to come and you're going to operate on this layout, and you're going to know as much as I can provide that experience. You're going to be immersed in what it was like to be there back then. And then I think the New Haven Railroad itself ends up coming along for the ride. It ends up being the flavor that, or the seasoning that ties it all together. Because you can tell a similar story about any railroad, but the New Haven, I think, once you operate here, you'll really get a sense of two things. One, and it's what I think makes my layout actually pretty unique. One, you'll have a huge contrast between the shoreline and the branch lines. Huge contrast. I mean, if you operate on the main line, you're stressed out. You go up and operate on on one of the locals, it's a whole different world, and it's all in the same basement. The other thing that's unique is you've got 4 local freights that all interchange cars one with another. On a typical model railroad or a typical railroad, you'll have interchanges and you'll drop off cars and you'll pick up cars, and that's all you do. Those cars don't move anymore. On my railroad, a car is going to be picked up and moved, sometimes 2-3 times during a session, because that's how the New Haven in particular moved its traffic. And so unlike any other railroad that you might otherwise operate on, you're going to get that sense of how the local freights interchange and interacted with one another on this web of lines in southern New England. So that's, I think, what's going to really, really make this railroad a little bit different than anything else you might operate on.
So, what information does an operator need to know before the op session starts?
Well, they don't need to know anything other than how to operate a throttle. My main thing is that you need to know that you're going to have fun, because that's the main name of the game.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, my passion is to convey the history, to tell the story, to give you an immersive experience. But if you're not having fun, it's all for naught. You're not going to be able to enjoy it. So the main thing is that you're going to have fun. But if you're so inclined, I usually send out to my operators before an op session, I send out an email. And the email is in the form of a memorandum to operating crews. And the memorandum tells people what trains are running, what they do, and what's happening that day. So I'll pick a day, and sometimes I'm lazy, sometimes it'll be the same day. But I'll pick a day in September, October 1948. And in this email, in this memorandum, it tells you, what was going on in the world that day. Who won the baseball game last night? What's the weather that day? What's the top hit that you're going to hear on the radio? What's the movie that's playing down at the cinema? Really giving you that sense of, okay, I'm going back in time. When I go to Chris's layout to operate, I'm going in a time machine. You come into my basement, you're going to hear 40s music playing on a Zenith tabletop radio via Bluetooth, but nobody needs to know that. But it's period music playing through an authentic, albeit gutted, Zenith radio. You're going to see things hanging on the wall that are period calendar, some posters, an immersive experience. So, but from an ops standpoint, because we're talking about ops, you're going to get paperwork that tells you what your train does. So it's a little 4x6 card, and it's as if you had an old head operator standing by your side. Gives you all the pro tips of your train. A lot of times I will also, for somebody that's brand new to the layout, I'll just pair them up with an old head, one of my normal operators, and they'll get qualified on the railroad, just like the prototype. But, I've had guests here that haven't ever operated, and I say, read the paper. If you read the paper, you're going to be fine. So if you go through and just, read the pro tips from the old head, the conductor's notes, I call them, read the conductor's notes, you can follow along. And, I'm always the one that is kind of hovering around. And if there's any questions, that's my role. I wish I could operate like you do, Don, but that's just my, I'm kind of, the unseen guest at every session. So I'm, roaming around and answering questions.
I can't do that. So anyway, one other question I want to ask you about your switch list, because I noticed your posts on Facebook about the size of the switch list. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the easiest way for me to get started in ops was to do switch lists. And so that's how I started out doing ops. I made actually, for the first sessions, they were replicating that day in the life of the Valley Local that John described. So I contrived the switch list to recreate all those moves. So those were all filled out ahead of time. And, for the first few sessions, we just kind of ran that session. But then, I wanted to try and get more prototypical. So, the switch list, evolved. So it became more organic. But then here it became the problem, is that I couldn't just stick with a switch list, because the thing that I ran into fairly early on was the switch list didn't give me a good way to transfer cars from local to local. And so I needed to have some paperwork to go with the car. I came up with a contrived car transfer form. And so the operator that had the car in their train, or they picked up the car and it was in their train, they needed to, drop it off and have another train pick it up. They needed to fill out this car transfer form, to tell the subsequent local, that this car was for them and where the car needed to go. And I was just like, well, that's silly. That prototype didn't do that. So what did the prototype do? Well, waybills. I was like, damn it. So I got to do car cards and waybills now. So where I am at the moment is kind of a hybrid. I've got what looks like a switch list, but it's the conductor's train report. I've got a prototype form, and basically it's a conductor's wheel report, and it shows you every car that's in your train when you leave the yard at the beginning of the session. And then if there are any cars in your train that need to go to a subsequent local, you'll have paperwork just for those cars. So you'll have a waybill for those cars. And then as you come to each town, you would get a switch list, and the switch list tells you what to do with the cars that are in the town that you just came to. But now, what I posted on Facebook is I'm looking at sizes because I'm trying to get the form factor down to something that's manageable and also easy to print out. So, they make 4x6 inch index cards. So I'm thinking about, maybe reducing the paperwork down to 4 inch by 6 inch. I've got somebody that's going to be making custom bill boxes. And so it's just one box at each town, just like on the prototype. There's no, pick up, hold, set out kind of thing. It's one box, and all the paperwork's in there. You pull out the paperwork, and you follow the paperwork just like the prototype. So I think that's where I'm headed is car cards and waybills, but they're going to be based on the prototype. I've got I just today, as a matter of fact, during lunchtime, I put together I found an empty car waybill and home route card off the New Haven that I kind of doctored up a little bit in Photoshop to reduce it down. And I already had a freight waybill form, and I'm starting to put those together. And, I'll be trying those out in an upcoming op session. We'll see how the operators like it.
It sounds like 4x6. It sounds like you're going to O-scale waybills, by the way, which must be really nice for your operators. Nice and easy to read.
Especially the old guys.
Exactly. But what I'm also thinking about, and going back in full circle into what we were talking about, you've immersed yourself in the history of the New Haven, especially the Valley local. You've learned so much about it. I would imagine the waybill is kind of a natural choice for you because it allows you to share all this history, the traffic, and what was actually being moved. That seems to be an even deeper immersion, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. And again, it's teetering over the brink of that rabbit hole again, because I'm wondering, okay, I know the OPSIG has that industry and shippers database, and and I know Mike Confalone had at one time, he had all of the detail on the waybills, what the commodity was, where it was coming from, where it was going to. And he found, and I'll probably find as well, and maybe I don't need to go down that route, and I can save myself a lot of time, because the operators, they just want to know where the car, what car do I have to pick up and where is it going, right?
Yep.
I mean, everything else is a lot of work for very little payback. The return on investment of time. I mean, that's something I'm really going to have to confront, because you're right, Ray. I mean, it's as it, that is the detail and the work as it should be. But talk about compromises. It's not just compromising on space. It's not just selective compression on the physical track and layout. It's compromise of time. I don't have an army of clerks, to recreate all this paperwork. It's selective compression of the business of railroading also that, some people may not think about until they get to this part of their layout.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough balance between time and the information you have. You want to share it. Are they interested? Do you have the time to share it? Yeah, it really is. It's a huge balancing act between all of them. I know how I personally feel. I want to tell the story. I want to tell all the things I learned, and whether you want to listen to them or not, right? You're going to learn anyway. When you show up, you're going to learn, and maybe that could be the case for you as well.
Yeah, you've heard tonight. I mean, I certainly would like to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
I was trying to get into that paperwork, Form Ds and all that stuff with the dispatch and all that stuff, but the operators is not receptive to that at all. You know what I mean? They don't want to, they just, turn the signal red or green and they go. You know what I mean? They don't want to carry all this paperwork, repeat instructions, and they just don't want to get into that.
You need better friends, Don.
Well, let's ask that as a question, Chris. Did you get pushback when you made these changes?
I said that totally tongue in cheek, because the short answer is yes. I've gotten some pushback. I've actually had a couple of folks who shall remain nameless. They know who they are. Say that they don't want any paperwork. They just want, at the most, they want a switch list. They want to know what car they picking up and where's it going. And I'm thinking to myself, you are missing so much of what a real railroad is all about. And that's one of the things that has really kept me off of the whole car card waybill, typical micromark. Listen, everybody's got their thing. I'm not dissing it, but you look at the micromark system, and it's a card game. And this isn't a card game. This is, in my mind, this is a railroad simulation. This is a historical reenactment of what the New Haven Railroad did in the late 1940s in Southern New England. And yeah, some wags, a rivet counter is going to ding me on, maybe they'll ding me on the fact that I don't have the right commodities filled out on my waybills, or I don't have any commodities filled out on my waybills, or I don't have the right routing instructions. That's another thing I know that Confalone kind of backed away from a little bit is, he had all the intermediate railroads, that where the car originated from before it got onto his railroad, because he's freelance. And so that's all enriching and providing the context for a prototype freelance railroad. And even he backed away from that. And so I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, it's really cool. And yes, it tells the story, but again, return on investment. I've got resin kits to build. I've got track to maintain and locomotives to tinker with. I've been blessed that I have had a mountain of help building this layout, from Bill Schneider to Dave Messer to Jim Lincoln and Jim Dufour. And I know that I'm missing people. I've purchased buildings and had buildings donated. I've had a lot of help. And, I'm not complaining, but it's still not enough, because I've only got one lifetime and I've only got so many hours in the day. Right. And so, am I going to go through all the time, because time is a resource? I'm going to spend all the time looking up all those routings. It would be wicked compelling and super fun to do that. But that's going to mean that I can't get to this other stuff that, the operators might actually give a darn about.
No, paperwork has always been an issue with operating sessions, and from my experience operating on layouts and hosting layouts, is that they don't want the paperwork. You know what I mean? They want to know like you said, where this car came from, where it's going. Yep. Or just where it's going. Never mind where it came from. Where is it going? I want to spot the car, and then at the end of the night, I'm going to go home.
Well, I think that, and this just occurred to me as you were talking, so thank you for bringing that up, is that if you're, and a lot of people aren't this blessed or lucky to have a lot of operators, right? And some of the larger layouts I know sometimes have difficulty finding enough operators. But Southern New England, as Ray knows, is, and Don, from living up here too, it's densely packed. There's a lot of population. There's a lot of people. We're blessed with a lot of layouts around here.
Oh, absolutely.
And so I've got a good number of operators. I just sent out an email to a list of almost 30 people because I'm going to be starting ops up again. But these are all people that, if they're not already your friends, they become your friends, and your friends, and you'll know who's more into the history, who's more into the historic reenactment, who's more into what it is you're trying to do there, versus who wants to come just for the social aspect, have a few beverages, and just move cars around, which is awesome in itself, and it's its own thing. So, if you're blessed enough to have a variety of operators, then I'm thinking sometimes I have a purely historical session. Right. And, just those guys that are really into it and really get immersed into it, they come for that session. But then, maybe I have a session for somebody, a group of folks that are from out of state. They only operate here occasionally. They don't really give two rips about the New Haven Railroad. They just want to come, have the camaraderie, have lunch, move some cars around. Then that's the easy setup. I just do a switch list and off to the races. So, maybe that's a good way to address it.
So what's your min and max as far as op session operators?
Well, actually, it's very scalable. It can be minimum. I've done one.
I don't know. I didn't think you could get down that low.
Yeah. So during COVID, I had a lot of fun just operating the layout by myself. I would set up a full session, and then because it's 4 locals, I'd do one local. Then another day I'd do another local. And then another day I'd do another local. Now, I can't be firing trains back and forth at myself, not on the fast clock anyway, but, to to stress test and blow the dust off the main line, sometimes I would even just operate the main line, especially when I was trying to dial in the schedule. I would do that by myself. My ideal crew size is 8. So that is a tower operator who operates all the switches in Saybrook interlocking. So only the mainline switches through Saybrook interlocking are powered. All of the other switches on the railroad are manual. Again, that hands-on experience. So you got a tower operator that operates the turnouts in Old Saybrook and also, gives trains the eastbound local permission to get across the main from one side of the railroad to the other to do its work, and also gives clearance to the westbound local to go up the line, and also keeps track of the trains that are going through the station. That's a tower operator's job. But then I've got the shoreline moles, I call them. So you've got Cedar Hill, which is the west end, and New London, which is the east end. So that's an operator each firing cars at one another. So that's 3. Then I've got 3 locals that are one-man crew because they operate mostly in the room that's got the narrowest aisles. so that's one-man crew, and so that brings you up to 6. And then the Valley local, which is really the flagship train, and it also covers the most real estate and is in the room that has the widest aisles and has the most work, that's got a 2-man crew. So my ideal is 8. I've had as many as 13. Yeah, that got crowded. Comfortably, my max I would really say is 11. And that's 2-man crews on all the locals, the 2 shoreline operators and the tower operator. That's 11. But 8 is really the sweet spot.
So what's with the 30 guys you sent the email to? I mean,
cast a wide net, you'll get back a few.
All right. I'm just asking because I'm like, well, you're going to get 11 guys and you're sending out email to 30 guys. A lot of upset people.
And this is also the first email for the new season. So it's really asking 2 questions. One, do you want to stay on this list? So I figure there's going to be some, listen, no offense, things change, schedules change, interests change. So I'm sure I'll get some folks that drop off the list. And then the second question, do you prefer Wednesdays or Fridays? I'm leaning heavily toward Fridays because even though it's a compact area, I do have some guys that are really interested in operating that are coming from Poughkeepsie, Northern Jersey, Southern New Hampshire, Eastern Massachusetts. So a Friday night, not a school night, might be a little more convenient for them. And I do plan on having an occasional Saturday session for folks, that really just can't make it on a weeknight. And so yeah, 30 people, that's the widest net of folks that I've got.
Turning back just a little bit about you during COVID when you're running by yourself. This falls into what I always say, that the host should run every train on his layout to make sure there's no problems. And, you get all this stuff out of the way before you start bringing in operators. There's nothing worse than bringing in operators and there's problems.
And you haven't tested your system.
You haven't tested the system. That's all I'm going to say about that.
You mentioned, you do run them when you're by yourself, and you did that during COVID. But when there's operating sessions, you stand back. When you're standing back after all of this historical research, the work, the modeling, the approval from those who have run this railroad, and now you get to stand back and see other people emulating autumn of 1948 on the Valley. How does that feel, and what is your favorite part? What is your favorite part to watch of all of that?
I'm so glad you asked that. I think you've been doing this a while.
A few. There's been a few since 7. I know I can tell you true. That. Yes.
I'm so glad you asked that question because it gives me a chance to answer. There's a spot in the layout that is over on the west leg of the Saybrook Y. It's a little alcove. It's not used very often, so I'm out of the way, and I can just stand back and watch this orchestra play and just watch, like from a drone's view, see the shoreline trains going back and forth. Having that sense of satisfaction when I see the Yankee Clipper go through Saybrook right on the advertised, see the local coming from New London, finally getting clearance and going up the Valley line. So it goes up the east leg of the Y and heads up the branch. Going and walking around, heading north toward Hartford and stopping in Middletown and seeing that the airline local and the Valley local, just like on the prototype, hey, they're in town at the same time. So there's a bunch of guys in Middletown and they're trying to coordinate their moves with one another, just like the prototype did. Just being able to to see all that come together and listening to the 40s music in the background, listening to the chatter. Some of my guys are trying to emulate that movie Great Railroad at work with some of the terminology of the tower operators and stuff, some of the accents as well. And I mean, we're not quite into role playing where we're going to get in the outfits and everything, but it's as close to a historic reenactment as you can get to. But as compelling as that is, and it is, and I love it, and that is where everything has come together, and everything that I've worked to try and accomplish to create that immersive experience all comes together, and I'm seeing it. It's going to sound corny, but it's absolutely true. Watching everybody's faces and watching how they're getting into it is super, super satisfying. I've been able to create, with the help of a lot of others, I've been able to create a little world and a time and a place where people can turn their workday brains off. They can come and be in another time and place with people that hopefully they all like each other, the people that they enjoy being around, and just having fun, bringing this thing to life. It's just, I mean, that's priceless. There, you can't put a figure on that.
That's the satisfaction of the whole thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yep.
For the listener who's hanging around the edge of that rabbit hole that you talk about, who is wanting to dive in on a historical portion of model railroading and do the same things that you've done, take that and build a time machine and take them back and build this recreation, what is your advice to them?
Start small. Start small, because that not to be corny about it, but that train will run away with you. If you dive into that rabbit hole, it's hard to get out, and you can never get around to building a layout if you go too far down there. So I would say start small, pick a portion, find out as much as you can about that portion, and then figure out your resources of time and money, extrapolating from what you found pleasurable and what you found compelling about that small slice, and then go from there. Don't start big, because you'll get overwhelmed quickly and you may not end up building anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Solid advice from a guy who has dove down a bunch of rabbit holes and built a historical reenactment of the Valley Local on his layout. We will share all the links related to this episode on our website, aroundthelayout.com/238. And that'll include some images of Chris's layout and also some of those waybills that he was talking about. We'll share all of that. Chris, it was so awesome to catch up with you. Let's not go another 230 episodes before having you back on the show again. Well, we've got plenty to talk about the Valley Local. I got to make a trip down to Middlesex County and come see this layout. I've been 10,000 miles to see layouts, but I haven't been 30 some odd. So it's high time I get down there to go see it. Right. So absolutely. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Ops.
Hey, Chris, thank you. I've actually been to your layout. I've hadn't operated on it yet, but I've been there doing a layout tour. It's unbelievable. And hopefully one of these, as I get back there to get to an operating session, now that I've heard all this, I'm all excited about to do that.
You both have a standing invitation. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.